I wish I could answer that question. I mean, I wish I could hold that answer back, as you put it. More than half the population of Rwanda was born since the genocide. More than half the population of Rwanda, by 18 years after the genocide, had no possibility of even the remotest physical memory of it directly. On one level, that's a kind of demographic, I don't want to say hope or good news, but it's a kind of, it's an opportunity that Rwanda's complicated demographics, including the fact that a lot of people who should be older are dead, and I mean were killed because of this, are dead because of this, that affords. It also means that, but we all know that memory isn't something you have to have yourself when it gets into things like identity memory and group memory and the memory of a wound and the memory of a grudge. And so what gets handed down at home amongst people who had any of the many, many, many different experiences you might have during the genocide. It's people who were hunted, people who are hunters, people who weren't, people who are affiliated or associated, or who have somebody who's in jail, who have somebody who's in the ground, have somebody who's never been recovered their body. All of those things, it's extremely difficult to get at that. And one of the difficulties is that the older people who have the direct experience are actually, it's possible to talk to them about that experience. They're much more forthcoming about it. Even if it's shaped, even if after all these years it comes in various packages, the young have these thoughts and these feelings, but they've grown up in a culture where basically the ideology of the post-genocide government is, look, these ethnicities are artificially constructed and overwhelmingly manipulated politically and socially over time to create conflict and polarization. And we are all Rwandans above all, which is true. They all, I mean, it's also not true that those identities are the fact that they're artificial doesn't mean that they're not real. That's the big problem. That's the big tension in this idea of we are all Rwandans. It's true they're all Rwandans. They speak one language, they have the same religions, they live intermingled. Their commonalities are more profound perhaps than their distant differences. But those artificial identities, blood has made them true over time. And that complicates the process of then a sort of social revolution where you say, we'll just dismantle them. And it becomes very hard to tell with the young. I don't think anybody feels that they know how to get through, whether they would talk frankly, whether they would, if they talked frankly, even know what they think 100%. This nationalist identity that supersedes Hutu or Tutsi identities, or identity politics, has worked for some of the young and is realer to them than it is to their parents. So it's not also always right to think of that as artificial, though it's also an artificial construct because it's engineered and it's imposed and there's this idea of enforced unity. I'll tell you this, Rwandans are living cheek by jowl with those whom they were set against in '94 in a way that nobody could have imagined at all when I first went there. Some of that is a very powerful state and a powerful security force that tolerates very little violence. It's been very rough, sort of suppression of that violence. But it's also a constant confrontation with it in a whole lot of different fora. The public communal genocide trials, various kinds of strong state-imposed instruction. Some of it is very church-driven, some of it is very private, and a kind of cultivation of the idea that revenge you can't have. Justice is kind of impossible, but accountability of some sort we can have. Truth we can never get fully, but we can get a fair amount of if we have these communal trials and there's an imperative for confession and a reward for confession and a reward for letting it out now and telling each other what was done. Many of the complaints about that are that the government, also its forces, the RPF forces, also committed war crimes or killed people along the way in the ending of the genocide and the immediate aftermath. The scale of that is heavily disputed, but nobody denies that it happened. It's more complicated than that because Rwanda basically had a decade of war from 1990 to 2000 inside the country, as well as the follow-up overflow wars, aftermath wars in Congo. Nobody has been prosecuted for genocidal type crimes by Hutus during the periods of the wars either, just like the Tutsis who've committed atrocities during that period weren't. So there's a kind of agreement, the war, or a bargain that the war is kind of disappeared almost, you know? That was the price we paid for the genocide that was in the middle of it. So it's a very, very complex thing. I mean, sometimes I say the genocide was the easy part to get your mind around. It was the horrific part, but from a trying to think about it, trying to understand it, trying to put your mind around it, what does it mean to ask people to forgive the crimes that were committed? What does it mean to ask a woman who was serially raped in a village where all the women were raped, you know, to forgive those people? And what does it mean if she does? I, frankly, have spent years now stumped by that. I have people explain it to me. I can tell you what they say, but I'm not totally sure that I get it. And I don't know that we have a time frame in which we can understand what it would mean for them to sort of get past this. It takes a long time. But within that, if you go there now, the way that people are living together, a whole lot is swept under the rug, a whole lot is kept inside. Some people say it's terribly explosive. I have not seen evidence of it being terribly explosive. I think it's terribly intense. It could become explosive, I suppose. That's easy to imagine. It's always been the easy bet to bet against Rwanda after the genocide, ever being able to pull it together, because all of it seems impossible. But Rwandans often say, we have no choice. And that can sound very fatalistic, but it can also be very sort of a kind of profound confrontation with your situation. You have two choices. One is, we've seen what happens when we destroy ourselves. We have no choice but to try to do something else. And the intricacy of those balancing acts inside each person, inside each social construction, inside each institution is endlessly fascinating. And I think, look, around the world falls apart a lot. It's pretty instructive. You don't see a lot of places where the world puts itself back together, even in ways that it's easy to see where the fault lines are. So that makes it very absorbing to look at, but I can't tell you thumbs up, thumbs down. I sometimes say, you know, this is a book that I'm working on now, or this is a story of unanswered and possibly unanswerable questions. Just how big Africa is, and they stuck America, the United States into one section, they stuck Russia into one section. I can't remember if China was in there too, but I think so, exactly how they distributed it. But you basically realized, you know, this is a very enormous place, and it's very varied.